Welcome to another one of our wonderful calls. Today we're going to hear from a lot of great speakers, starting with Alfeca about the National Infrastructure Bank and the legacy of FDR's New Deal. My name is Randy Voller. I served 4 terms as mayor of Pittsburgh, was also our state party chair, among other things. And we've got a list of great speakers here. We're going to start off, because I know we have to get to Susie, if Alfeca Mutardi, former senior economist, International Monetary Fund, if Alfeca would just kind of walk us through the beginning of this for folks who are first time on, or those of us that like to keep hearing this to really understand the program. Alfeca, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Alfeca Mutardi. I'm a macroeconomist. I'm going to talk a little bit to get us started about where we are on the economy and how this National Infrastructure Bank proposal will help. The economy is okay for now, but it's starting to show signs of being frayed around the edges. First thing that we notice is that the inflation rate is now ticking up. This is in response to the tariffs. It was 2.7% inflation in June. That's very worrisome that it's ticking up. The economy contracted in the first quarter. That's also worrisome. Consumer sentiment is plummeting. Housing is decimated. The jobs report is sort of okay, but a lot of people say there's weakness there because the number of jobs posted is no greater than the number of people looking for a job. So that's a little bit of weakness there. If it sinks any further, then that'll pull down consumption and economic growth. Meanwhile, Trump has announced more tariff changes. He agreed with Europe to a 15% tariff on goods coming into the US from Europe. The stock market soared on this news, strangely enough, but it's out of and reached new highs, but it's totally out of sync with recent corporate earnings. And there were a whole flurry of articles today from Seeking Alpha and other investment sources that say, oh, well, we're really in a bubble stock market. Could be a possible correction. Titles like, you do expect there's going to be a correction, correct? We're looking out for that. So these tariffs reduce business certainty, so they're having trouble making their investments. General Motors and farmers are hit hard by these tariffs. Monetary policy isn't helping either. The Federal Reserve is split on whether or not to lower interest rates or keep them unchanged. It'll announce on Wednesday, tomorrow. Meanwhile, margin debt in banks, that is lending for speculators to speculate on the stock market, is way, way up in line with these high stock market prices. If there is a correction, that is going to unravel and really hit banks hard. Meanwhile, the big number to look at is our national debt, now at $37.2 trillion. We're still running deficits of $2 trillion a year. That's pushing up interest rates on the long end. And the GOP budget, Trump signed the big, beautiful budget bill with $4 trillion in tax cuts for the rich, only partly offset by $1 trillion in spending cuts that are targeted to hit the poorest people hardest for healthcare, food, housing assistance, education. And meanwhile, that tax cut is going to add another $3.4 trillion onto the debt. And Congress also passed something called a rescissions package to try and claw back spending that's already been approved by Congress. Every time there are spending cuts like this, that helps to push the economy. It doesn't grow the economy, but pushes it into a recession. So the NIB is the only positive policy in town left, which can grow the economy. That's how the NIB is going to help. This concept of an off-budget public bank has been done 4 times before, starting after the American Revolutionary War, going through the Great Depression and World War II. The bank's charters timed out after about 20 years, but this is a very American idea. Other countries around the world use this model. They call it the American system, and they have permanent banks in place to solve finance their infrastructure. So how does this bank work? It is an independent public corporation enacted under the U.S. Government Corporations Act. It's a mixed ownership with private investors coming in to capitalize the bank. The great beauty of this bank is that it's off budget. It directs $5 trillion in financing to infrastructure that this is what engineers say we need. But this number is so huge now that it can really shake up and improve the economy. This bank will operate just the same as any commercial bank. It's capitalized with privately owned treasuries that are swapped for preferred stock. And then it goes on to lend to any public entity, a state, a county authority that needs public infrastructure. It uses standard banking rules and accounting software, actually creates money each time it gives out a loan. All commercial banks, most people don't know that. All commercial banks create money every time they give out a loan. This one is no different, but it is financially self-sufficient. It can live off of its net interest earnings, and it requires no new federal spending, taxes, or deficits, and it has lots of rules in place to make sure that the loans don't go off track. And it's going to be very much managed like the previous bank under FDR, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, that got us out of the Great Depression and helped us to win World War II. That was a huge bank, bigger than the federal budget, bigger than all the banks combined. It was called the fourth arm of government. Very effective in building infrastructure and rebooting the economy. This bank will do the same. So I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to our next speaker. Thanks.
All right, Alfecca, we got finished a bit early. Amazing. Moving right along. So Susie, if you're on, Susie
Okay.
Shannon. Okay, Susie Shannon has represented the 14th Council District on the Los Angeles City Health Commission since 2014, where she's also served as president for 2 years. Ms. Shannon has worked with the homeless and low-income community since 2005 and serves as the executive director of the nonprofit Poverty Matters. She is a member of the Democratic National Committee and chairs the DNC's Poverty Council. Susie, take it away.
Thank you. I won't be a member of the Democratic National Committee until next month, just for the interest of full disclosure. So hi, everyone. I'm Susie Shannon. As I said, I'm the founder and chair of the DNC Poverty Council, and I'm representing the council today. We were so blown away by the presentation that the National Infrastructure Bank folks gave to our council, and I'm so excited to be speaking today about the National Infrastructure Bank as a way to address poverty issues. For me, I work on housing issues. I work on all different things, but housing issues and people who are currently homeless or formerly homeless. And we have over 700,000 people who are homeless in the United States and over 21 million renters who are rent burdened. And that means that they pay over 30% of their income in rent. And we now are in an affordability crisis with housing. And what does that mean? That means that seniors on a fixed income who are only getting Social Security are finding it very hard to make their rent, or maybe impossible to make their rent. Starbucks baristas, fast food workers, our caregivers, you name it, they're having a lot of trouble making ends meet and being able to afford housing. On the flip side of this, in order to get this housing built, this affordable housing, it takes a lot of money. And that question comes up constantly. I mean, we can show how much it is to service somebody who is homeless. And as a health commissioner for the city of Los Angeles, I look at these costs. I mean, just in California, we spend $45,000 to $55,000 per year per person that's chronically homeless. And for us, it would cost less. It's more humanitarian. It's better health-wise and in every way to get people stabilized to provide housing. The problem is we don't have the money for it. And so relying really on the private market, where they mainly want to create market rate housing, has been somewhat of a disaster. When I used to give a talk like this 7 years ago, I would talk about how we had over 500,000 people who are homeless. Now we have over 700,000. So things have been getting worse. We so desperately need an off-budget solution to being able to put money into affordable housing. And really, we should just say low-income housing, because that's what we're really talking about. That's where the real dearth of housing is right now, which is for people who are of the lowest incomes to be able to find housing. Every year, I will tell you, as somebody who works for a nonprofit, and everyone else who works in this space will tell you that we are holding our breath every time there is a budget coming up, right? And we never know. Like, we try to get people to advocate to make sure that there's enough money in the Section 8 program, or in other programs like LIHTC and other program, which is low income tax credit program, to make sure that there is enough money there so that people won't lose their housing currently, but also so that we know that new people who are becoming homeless will have a way that where we can get them off of the streets and into housing. So any creative solution that is off budget that provides that kind of money, for us is really a solution for homelessness. And so I'm so excited both that this has bipartisan support, which is obviously in this day and age very important. But that this provides like a real concrete solution for the money that we're going to need to build the affordable or low income housing that we need. And we could talk about other things. There's obviously food and healthcare and a lot of other things that we need money for as well, for low income communities. But I will tell you, as somebody who has worked on these issues since 2005, when it comes to budget cuts, what's cut first and foremost are people who are low income in those programs. And that's because people who are low income tend not to have lobbyists that they can pay for. They don't have, a whole bunch of money to put into campaign coffers for candidates. And so they don't have the lobbying that's needed in order to keep their funds. And so this is, I mean, one of the reasons I'm a Democrat too, is because as somebody who works for a nonprofit, we have to appeal typically to Democrats in order to come up with these solutions. But this is such a fiscally sound, I won't say conservative, just a fiscally sound way of approaching this so that we're off budget. We don't have to hold our breath every single year when it comes to these budget cuts. And it's a way just to make sure that we can take care of the residents in the United States. So I'm a very strong supporter of this. Again, I so appreciate the leadership for the National Infrastructure Bank. I think this is a solution. I think given that has bipartisan support, this is a real possibility in terms of making this happen. And I just appreciate you all being on today, and thank you so much for giving me time to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Susie. I know in my community, when I see growth in food insecurity and growth in housing insecurity, those are not two places I want to see growth. I want it going down, but it's perpetually bedeviling. I agree with you. Uh, Folks, we're going to hear from Professor Harvey Kaye, who's the author of numerous books, including The Fight for Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, which earned him a spot on the Nation's Magazine Progressive Honor Roll in 2014. Professor Kaye has taught for many years at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, where he is the Ben and Joyce Rosenberg Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies. Professor Kaye, welcome to the phone call, and you just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Look, I am really honored to be here tonight, but in a moment I'm going to explain something. But even before I do anything else, I have to tell all of you that an invitation by the National Infrastructure Bank Coalition, the first thing that came to my mind, in fact, was not FDR. It was my original childhood hero, upon whom I've written as much as I have about FDR and the greatest generation. That's Thomas Paine. So Thomas Paine, as you probably all do know, wrote Common Sense, the revolutionary pamphlet that turned an American colonial rebellion into a revolution for independence and the making of a democratic republic. What most people don't know is that after the revolution and after the signing of the Treaty of Paris in the 1780s, Paine turned to his original love, which was science and engineering. And he actually spent time designing an iron bridge for the United States. The idea being that if you think 1780s, that if you were going to travel from one of the northern coastal cities like Boston or New York to one of the southern coastal cities like Charleston, you would have had to go by sea if you're going to get there in any timely fashion. And his feeling was that given the distribution of the states along the eastern coast, and every one of those states has a major river going into the Atlantic, that it would be a good way of uniting the country if you could construct an iron bridge, in his case in Philadelphia, build it over the Schuylkill River, and it would be an example and a model for iron bridges all the way down the coast to unite the country. However, there were no banks. No banks. And he turned to his political mentor, the man who originally advised him over in London to emigrate to America. He turned to Franklin and said, what can I do? What am I going to do? He said, and that's when Franklin urged him to go back to London and Paris and seek endorsements and financing there to build some kind of model in Europe that would then be able to be brought back into the country. Well, if you go to the Smithsonian, I believe it's somewhere in the original Smithsonian, there is actually a picture of what his iron bridge might well have looked like, and he's accorded recognition as one of the first designers of such things. So anyhow, I couldn't help but mention that. Okay, the necessity of a bank for the purposes that you folks and I have in mind, it's an imperative. That's all I can say. Now, this is the other thing I have to point out. I said I was going to mention this. When Stuart Rosenblatt invited me, it was a little unclear as to what he wanted me to do. And we went back and forth, and I will tell you that it was a rather funny exchange. So I sent him a variety of things that I had written, articles, especially things that I had written for Bill Moyer's website and the videos that I had done with Bill on his Bill Moyer's Journal on television. And he came back and he said to me, his reply, "Hi, I read through some of your materials and listened to some of the talks," and then he made some nice remarks about what he read. He said, "I think if you highlight the FDR New Deal, PWA, WPA, CCC, etc., and World War II economic developments, that would be great. But I know you emphasize the radical nature of the FDR administration, and that should be brought home. Also emphasize the social concomitants, that is Social Security, affordable housing, cultural inspirations like the Federal Theater Project, etc. That will be more than plenty. But your emphasis on several FDR speeches, including the Four Freedoms, is very important." Well, and I said to myself, wait, how long am I supposed to speak for? So
That's a semester. That's a whole semester.
Yes, right, exactly. So I said to him, well, what have you got in mind for me to do? And then ultimately he said, if you're in the 8-minute ballpark, that is fine, give or take. So I decided I can't do all that, but I have something that's very important to me. And if someday you want me to come back and talk about that kind of stuff, I'd be more than happy to. I decided to give you a talk on what matters to me about FDR that leads to all of these things, okay? And now specifically, my view of FDR, everyone calls him a liberal. I think he was not simply a liberal. I actually think that FDR was a social democrat. A social democrat. And I say this fully aware of the fact that FDR would have said he wasn't, but we have to understand he would have denied being a social democrat because the term social democrat in the first half of the 20th century, when he was getting so involved in politics, was the equivalent of socialist. There was no distinction at that time. So he'd never used the term. But I'm going to go further. I actually think in a very American way that FDR was a radical. And I'm going to explain that in a very American way. Now, when he entered politics in the 19-teens, he entered as a progressive with a capital P, probably sort of in the spirit of his cousin, Teddy Roosevelt. And later, Franklin himself would end up in the administration of Wilson, who, for all of his terrible sins as president, was actually also a capital P progressive Democrat. In the 1920s, FDR spent the 20s developing a new politics of liberalism for the Democratic Party. Okay, and then I think it's important to understand that it's in the late 1920s, and I'll explain how that came to be, especially when the depression, when the panic occurs, when the market crashes, he becomes all the more a social democrat and a radical. And that becomes all the more evident in the 1930s. And now I'm going to lay out why I make this argument. Now, amazingly, FDR had a very elite background. We all know that. He came out of Hudson River gentry, the family. There were two branches of the Roosevelt family. One was, I call it the Long Island branch, that was Teddy. They were the Republicans. And the other was in the Hudson Valley. They were the Democrats. But in any case, came out of a very elite background, went to Groton, he went to Harvard, and he went to Columbia University Law School. There's no doubt about that. He really was, in many ways, the closest part of the class we think of as an American aristocracy. But as I said, he becomes a progressive. And the most important thing is that he rejected the Gilded Age order. He rejected the Gilded Age ruling class that he himself had grown up a part of. Now, why is that the case? From early on, and increasingly so, he had a very powerful sense of American history, of America's purpose and promise. And as he saw it, the Gilded Age order, whether you want to call it the order of the robber barons or the order of, as he did, the industrial titans, an order economically characterized by laissez-faire economics, but also especially that what struck him is the extremes and the ever-widening extremes between rich and poor, which, as he saw it, was denying the promise of the Declaration, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Moreover, it was denying the concept of a democratic republic. It was denying a government of we the people, to the vast majority of the people. And I want to note, in that vein, FDR and Lincoln were very much alike in terms of their political thinking. Their political thinking in both cases was rooted in and nourished by the Declaration and the preamble. There's that, I think it was Lincoln, I'm going to have to paraphrase, and almost all of his political thinking came out of his encounter with the Declaration of Independence. And in FDR's case, especially the Declaration and the preamble, we the people, plus, because FDR comes later in American history, and he's very much aware that in the Gilded Age, there were innumerable struggles to try to realize the American promise. He was decidedly influenced by, impressed by, inspired by the struggles of generations of Americans who were trying to secure the American promise, but not only to secure the promise, but also to enlarge the we in we the people and the powers of the people. Indeed, as FDR often stated, the making of American democracy is a persistent, perpetual revolution. And by the way, from the 1920s through the New Deal 1930s and World War II, FDR advanced a vision of America's future grounded in the nation's historic promise and the democratic history it had engendered. He did so at the Commonwealth Club in September 1932 in a campaign speech when he called for, and very few people realize this, from the very start, he had in mind a vision of America and the idea of extending and deepening American rights in an economic and social direction. So in 32, he called for an economic declaration of rights and economic constitutional order. In short, he believed that's the least government could do in favor of the forgotten man and woman. Now, it's interesting because he gave that speech at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, which is, of course, as are any urban clubs, constituted by the more elite figures of the city. In 1941, he offered his annual message to Congress, and in the spirit of Lincoln's A New Birth of Freedom, he pronounced the four freedoms: freedom of speech and expression, freedom from want, freedom from fear. And then in his 1944 State of the Union address, he proposed a second Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights for all Americans. As he put it, we've come to basically looking back on the accomplishments of the New Deal and essentially the war effort that was still underway. He was convinced that Americans were prepared, given everything that had gone into the making of the New Deal, the beating of the Depression, and what looked like the likely defeat of the Axis, of the fascists, that Americans were ready for an economic Bill of Rights. How did he know that? How could he be so confident? In 1943, the White House commissioned polls, P-O-L-L-S, and they asked Americans, what do you want to see after the war? And to put it in short, as one of the pollsters wrote in a book on the beauty of video is I can do show and tell like I was in grade school. Mandate for the people. These were the results of the polling that took place. And to give you a prime example, 83% of Americans, 95% of Democrats, and 75% of Republicans wanted guaranteed national health care. And for what it's worth, just realize that in spite of everything the media may tell you, never after 1943-44 was there less than 50+% of Americans in favor of guaranteeing health care for all Americans. It's decidedly higher now, but even in the 1950s, it was over 50%. So anyhow, FDR's embrace of American history. How else did it matter? He learned how Americans in the 1770s and the 1860s had confronted mortal crises that threatened to destroy the developing nation and its revolutionary promise by radically extending and deepening American freedom, equality, and democracy. I mean, look, there would never have been a United States had there not been a guarantee, or at least a projection in the Declaration, that the elites of America were ready and prepared to create the makings of a democratic republic, as Thomas Paine had called for. Okay, I mean, it's very interesting to give you an example that in Virginia, the northern counties of Virginia were places where Methodist and Presbyterian and the growing number of Baptists, that the farmers themselves were evangelical Christians. And as far as they were concerned, they had little interest in a revolution that might put into power the Anglican elite of Virginia. And they feared the possibility that that Anglican elite might even establish a state church. That was their thinking. When they read Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, which 4 or 5 times in the pamphlet he called for separation of church and state, it was at that moment that they began to enlist in the cause. Similarly, there were similar events around the country. When working people realized that they had a stake in the outcome of the revolution, or in the possibility of the revolution alone, that's when they entered, okay? So in the face of British power, the answer was democracy. Similarly, 1860s, in the confrontation between the North and the South, the Confederate separation, as you know, what enables America to prevail is the fact that as Union soldiers were moving south, Southern African-American slaves were escaping the plantation and heading to the Union lines, demanding that they be given some role in the battles, whether it was digging trenches, serving in the kitchens, whatever it was, or indeed, as many of the men requested, carrying a weapon into war for the North. Now, it was that kind of thing, and generals in the Union Army sending notes back to Lincoln saying, what do I do? That and effectively presses Lincoln to think seriously about an Emancipation Proclamation. Moreover, Northern troops heading to the South in their confrontation with the evidence of just how brutal and awful slavery was, they began to write home. There's a lot of research on this. Write home saying, now we understand that this is not only about, the unity, this is about freedom. This is a question of freedom. So Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, and eventually, of course, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments ensue. It's radical change, really a radical enhancement of American freedom, equality, and democracy that enables Americans, in spite of the fact they would have ever denied it ahead of time, that enables them literally to save and secure the American promise. Now, in the 20s, as I said, it's interesting to consider that FDR was stricken with polio. And I'm sure you've all heard of Frances Perkins, who was his Secretary of Labor. And it was Perkins who said she was convinced that was a fundamental change had occurred in Roosevelt. He had always been a progressive politically, but he didn't have the kind of human touch and the human sympathies that emerged until he faced his own personal crisis, his own mortality. But that just made him a sympathetic, empathetic man. What also happens in the 20s, which we hear less about, though Perkins acknowledges it, is that Eleanor Roosevelt was liberated from the shadow of FDR, and she becomes a significant figure in a variety of women's activist groups in New York City. One of which was the Women's Trade Union League, which were elite women who were engaged in supporting working people and the project of organizing unions. She met a host of Jewish women, socialist labor organizers, especially obviously in the needle trades. She would bring them home. And she brought home specifically to educate FDR as to the needs of working class families. And
Okay,
sorry, am I running out of time
Professor,
already?
well, I mean, it's so enthralling, and my background is history, so I could just we're going to come back for questions. So we're going to hold right there because we have a couple other speakers.
Okay.
We're going to hold there. We're going to come back for questions. But that was quite enthralling and very interesting about how we got to the point where FDR actually could push through his programs and policies. So we're going to go to is Christine Reuter on? Is Christine here?
Yep, I'm here.
Christine is a member of the Delaware County Council in suburban Philadelphia. She graduated with honors from Harvard University, earned her law degree at the University of California, Berkeley. Also, my parents went there. Yay. Go Bears. She spent time as in-house counsel at both Pico Energy and Cigna Corporation until she was sworn in as a member of the county council. She's directly involved in passage of a resolution from the Delaware County Council in support of National Infrastructure Bank. Christine, take it away.
Thank you. It was actually really interesting to hear about Roosevelt. My name's pronounced Ruther. Maybe you know a relative of mine, Walter, who was somewhat involved in many of those same things in the 30s and 40s. And I just had somebody at our meeting in July, accuse me of being a democratic socialist, just like my uncle Walter. My great uncle Walter, which I thought was actually pretty entertaining. I thanked her for bringing him up and then proceeded to talk about all of the great things that the labor movement did for this country. But I'm a member of Delaware County Council in Pennsylvania. And Delaware County, I think I just want to give you a little bit of background because you'll understand why we're an advocate for the National Infrastructure Bank. We're one of the collar counties around Philadelphia in the state of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're the 5th largest county by population. We are the 3rd smallest by area. That makes us a very densely populated county. When I was growing up in Delaware County, there were parts of it that were still rural, and that's not true anymore. I don't even think we have parts that are exurban. I think we're mostly suburban. We're also the poorest of the collar counties in southeastern Pennsylvania. Our only city, Chester, which also happens to be where William Penn actually landed, and the oldest municipality in the Commonwealth, declared bankruptcy during the pandemic. It's a mini version of the Rust Belt, and has quite a story when you think about things like the Great Migration, if we want to talk about history. But Chester, along with other underrepresented parts of the county, just recently lost its the largest hospital system to private equity greed. I don't know what else to say, but it's left us a county with a population of approximately 675,000 people with just 2 hospitals and no level 1 trauma center. The bankrupt private equity operator who purchased the hospitals and then ran them into the ground, raped and pillaged, I don't know what else to say, has just today went into bankruptcy court and asked for permission to abandon all of these properties, which because they weren't getting offers that were sufficient to cover the mortgage and the back taxes. And they're going to leave our county and these communities, many of which are among the most under-resourced in the counties, with these large abandoned complexes that aren't paying taxes. It's going to cost millions of dollars to demolish them and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to redevelop them. And that takes capital. And when this isn't really a partisan issue, but when I was elected in 2019, we flipped Delaware County's government for the first time from Republican to Democratic control for the first time since 1875. And one of the reasons that matters is because for generations, our county operated under the idea that a small government is a good government. And starting really in the late 1980s, the Republican majority councils in Delaware County, actually they were all Republican councils, took the position that there was no, it was better to keep taxes low and not invest in public infrastructure. And that really mattered. No money was put into maintenance, and the county paid the price in 2018. That's before I got elected. When one of the county's largest office buildings, right in Media, Pennsylvania, the county seat, and one of the largest parking garage that the county owned, collapsed, or was starting to collapse and had to be condemned and torn down. And we are still paying the price for that. But more importantly, when we got into office in 2020, we commissioned the county's first ever facilities assessment. And we determined at the time, which is really 21, 22, when the report came out, that the county was in need of $350 million in capital investment just to get our remaining county-owned facilities up to code. $350 million. Our entire tax take in a year after a 23% tax increase last year is just under $300 million. That gives you an idea of what that kind of investment would look like to us. Similarly, as part of Southeastern Pennsylvania, we rely on our Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority, which those of you who follow the news in Pennsylvania will know has prepared 2 budgets and today started posting signs about a 30% service cut that's going to be affecting people. As the densely populated neighbor to Philadelphia, we're also the second most transit dependent county in the state. And we feel that because we're being told by our Republican legislature, who so far is not stepping up to the plate on this, that the counties need to quote unquote do their share. What that means when it comes to investing, whether it's in hospital systems that need it, or redevelopment that needs it, or our county buildings that need it, or our transportation system that needs it, we have one source of revenue. Like school districts in Pennsylvania, counties in Pennsylvania are really tied to the property tax. That means we've got in an aging population where people are increasingly on fixed incomes that are less than adequate if all they've got is Social Security. we're asking them to pay more and more to cover these costs. And we know, because we've been going out to market and we have to go out to market. In fact, we'll have the first reading of our next debt ordinance on our agenda in August, is we have to borrow even in the public markets on terms that are pretty tough to handle. We're estimating that this is probably going to cost us a 4% tax increase over the next 3 years, just to cover the debt service from this additional borrowing that we need to go out and do, which is the second of 3 tranches. So there'll be additional tax increases so associated with the third tranche. I can't tell you what a lifeline it would be to have something like the National Infrastructure Bank. It's not free money. It has to be paid back, but it can be paid back, can be borrowed on terms that are probably going to be considerably less expensive and paid back on terms that are considerably less expensive than even the exempt debt market, which, by the way, there were noises that Doge made early on of maybe we're going to cut the exempt debt out from under us. So this just becomes increasingly important. And I can tell you, I grasped it pretty quickly, I think. Alfecca can tell you that, and probably Stuart, because I was a tax lawyer and a financing attorney for 35 years. And so this was stuff that I understood. I worked with investments and kind of got a quick grasp of it. But my other colleagues on council didn't have that background, but even they could tell after spending a lot of time questioning folks that this was a good thing for us. And so we supported it. And we also went to the National Association of Counties, which met in Philadelphia at its annual meeting earlier this month, and also approved a resolution to support the formation of another National Infrastructure Bank, because counties in Pennsylvania aren't the only counties that are dependent on a property tax. And we have a lot of responsibilities. The facilities we have aren't extra and they're not nice, but they're there so that we can provide the services that we're legally obliged to provide. And we need help to do it. And this is not a handout or a giveaway. It's not some of the sporadic funding that we see that's on again, off again, delayed. I mean, Pennsylvania's already missed its deadline for its budget, and it's probably just going to go longer. This is a form of self-help,
Right.
and a means of borrowing that can help us do what we need to do to continue to be able to provide the services we are constitutionally and statutorily obligated to provide in our state. And so I am very grateful for the work that's being done here for today. And I say that I think that it's crucial to allowing those of us who have things like bridges and jails and nursing homes and courthouses that we have to maintain, data sources, increasingly electronic data and financial records that we need to maintain and keep secure. We need this. And I will happy to tell anybody that. So thank you.
I think you hit most of the high points there as a former elected local official. It really comes down to having other tools in the toolbox. I don't know if Pennsylvania, if you have to go through a local government commission like we do in North Carolina, every state is slightly different how they allow you to float bonds and to make sure that your balance sheet and profit and loss, although you're not making a profit as a nonprofit, but they look at it in those terms here. I'm 100% in agreement with you. We need other ways to address these issues in every community, or they just don't get addressed. Simple as that. And there's no way of doing it under the current system. I'm sorry for butchering your name, but I will say I am first generation on my dad's side from Germany, and in North Carolina, so it's Fuller, but they say Voller. But when I go to the mountains, they say Holler for Voller. So I've just gotten used in the South. I never correct them. I said, if you're hollering for Voller, then I'm happy.
Yeah, it all works for me.
It works.
We have another family who lives about 2 blocks away from us, and their name is, they also pronounce their name Ruther, but instead of spelling it R-U-E, R-E-U, they spell it R-U-E, and they keep saying, oh, I know your son. And I'm like, no, different family. They spell it wrong, but it's, sounds the same.
Every time I have the ones that claim that we're related, I always say we're separated by bank accounts. They're the rich ones. We're not.
Can I
So I
just
think
tell?
we
Can I
have our
just?
final speaker,
Yeah,
Brian
sorry.
Sullivan, who's been very patient. Harvey, did you want to
I
say
just
something?
wanted. I just wanted to tell our Ruther colleague that I always wondered why Eleanor Roosevelt supported Adlai Stevenson in '52 when Stevenson was not really a liberal. And in fact, a Roosevelt scholar and friend of mine, a woman in DC, said to me that her work showed her that if Eleanor could have chosen the candidate in 52 or 55, and for that matter, in 60, her candidate would have been Walter Reuther.
Oh, that's very interesting information. Well, with that, we're going to go on to Brian Sullivan, who's the Simones County, Washington treasurer, previously served as the mayor of Mukilteo. Is that how you pronounce it? Or Mukilteo? I, it, and you were on city council, you were the mayor, you served in the Washington House of Representatives, you were elected to the county council, and you're now the county treasurer. You're a leading advocate for investment, infrastructure, and business in the county. And you're also with the National Association, and you just said you moved over to a new committee when we were talking earlier. So Brian, welcome and take it away.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all the previous speakers. I've learned a lot today and I appreciate your participation. So I have a very long history on dealing in public works, but let me tell you a little bit about Snohomish County, and it's Mukilteo, but
Mukilteo.
they're tribal names, so so you're not expected to. You Germanized it a little bit. How's that?
I don't know. I'm just right. Thank you very much for bailing me out, Brian.
No
Brian
worries.
Sullivan is easy. I can.
Yep, as Irish as it gets. So
Yes.
Snohomish County is a large urban county. We actually have the largest building in the world where we build all the large Boeing planes, the 777, 787, and soon to be the 737. Seattle takes all the credit, but we're actually 20 minutes north in a different county. And so this is the employment center. We have 900,000 people who live and work here, and we're one of the fastest growing counties in the country. So, and we're on the Puget Sound. So, but I grew up in Mukilteo, a little tiny town, and I've seen a lot of growth, but and a lot of infrastructure. And call me nerdy, but I've always cared about roads. As a young mayor, I often said we had three public safety departments in our city. We have police, we have fire, and we have public works. Because if a fire truck can't get to a fire, there's a problem, right? So everything has to be hitting on all 8 cylinders. And so as a consequence, I concentrated my whole public life on dealing with finance, municipal finance, and public finance as it relates to infrastructure. One of the first jobs I had when I worked for the state Senate back in the 1980s was developing policy for one of the first of many, I think out of 22 states at that time, for a public works trust fund, which we grub staked at that time for $50 million. I came back as a member of the House 20 years later, and we had over $1 billion, all moving, all being loaned, 1.5%, half the rate of the bond ratings. And so that spurred me with the idea of seeing what I've seen with cities and counties, having oftentimes during bad economic times, difficulty doing anything related to, maintaining roads or sidewalks or water systems or sewer systems. So I got a state law change to allow larger urban counties in Washington State to develop their own public works assistance funds. So when I then was elected to the Snohomish County Council, I introduced an ordinance, and we got the votes. And over the last 15 years, we have developed a public works assistance fund. It took forever to get it funded because nobody cares until the bridge falls into the river, right? Nobody cares. Everybody knows about the deferred maintenance. Everybody knows an earthquake's coming. Everybody knows something bad's going to happen. Then when it happens, they're all screaming, "Why didn't you do something about it?" Even though they themselves knew, right? So So this fund, you know, which now has $4 million in it, has really hit a niche in Snohomish County where we loan money out very similar to what the state does, 1.5% interest or half the bond rate to small cities. And if you think that a city of 1,200 people in a large urban county thinks that $500,000 isn't a lot of money, it's everything to them, right? It really floats them. I mean, putting in a new water pump in the city of Darrington, they didn't have $80,000, right? So we were able to help them. And now this is ongoing, and it's turned out to be a great model. I've also developed, as now being the county treasurer for the last 6 years, we have developed an investment fund which is about $1.2 billion now, 700 million when I was elected, and it's now up to 1.2 billion. I've decided, because treasurers in the state of Washington have broad authority to develop a new infrastructure program to lend tax dollars back to local municipalities for infrastructure work. As an example, we loaned $60 million to the Port of Everett. This is where all the plane parts come through, not the Port of Seattle, Port of Everett. The $60 million has created 2,500 temporary construction jobs, 200 new housing units, 250,000 square feet of mixed-use commercial space. And it's turned out to be a great success. We've loaned $5 million for small infrastructure projects to Snohomish County on its own, directly out of the Treasury. We're in a conversation on a new housing project. I think our favorite daughter from Los Angeles would greatly appreciate this, for affordable housing for $20 million. And the list goes on. We have another 40 or 50 million to loan out. So I can't tell you how excited I am to actually see something like this happen at the national level. And $5 trillion, come on, we have to be honest, that's just a drop in the bucket to our actual needs. So, but now I would just like to pose to everybody, now is a good time. I was in Philadelphia. We were the last resolution on the floor. All the previous resolutions were about, you know, please keep funding, please make sure that, you know, our waterways program, our infrastructure program, our sewer programs, you know, that you continue to support that. But the reality is, we all know, we wouldn't be saying, please do this, but we all know the reality is that money's going to dry up. Our housing money, our voucher money in Snohomish County, we're bracing for it. We may lose 100 employees just in our housing program. It'll be tragic nationwide. This may be a good time to approach Congress and say, if you can't support us, you know, for emergency management, for infrastructure, for highways, then this is something you can at least give us to work diligently to help us, you know, and again, the tool in the toolbox. And then the states that already have the assistance fund and counties that may develop a future infrastructure funds, it's the synergy that will create the atmosphere for us to get the job done.
Right. It's not going to replace what we get from Washington or what you're doing. It's just going to work synergistically together. So thank you very much for that information, Brian. I'd like to recognize Carolyn Fowler, who is on the call. Carolyn is a DNC member and with the National Federation of Democratic Women, and you helped get this passed as a resolution, I believe, the Federation of Democratic Women. If you'd like to make a few comments, Carolyn?
Well, just very briefly to all the the speakers, I think they all hit the nail on the head. I first heard about this through Susie because I am a member of her Poverty Council. Yes, I'm a DNC member. Yes, I will be submitting this resolution for our August 24th through 27th meeting for the Democratic National Committee to support this as well. The deadline is Monday, so I'm in time. I shared that with Stu. For me, when you talk about infrastructure, as we look at how the climate is changing and the resources are drying up, and when you think about how this beneficial this will be to job training programs, helping the working class really see a light at the end of the tunnel versus the gloom and doom they see today as far as opportunity. I just have to say, I jumped on board right away. So did my organization, the National Federation of Democratic Women, which we do have quite a bit of influence with the Democratic National Committee. And several of our congresspeople are members as well. So hopefully I don't foresee a problem. I will keep you posted. Alphecca has been very dynamic in supporting and presenting at several of our organizations. So look forward to we move on and make this happen. So thank you.
I think it's great to actually have a policy we can get behind that's positive and can actually do something.
Absolutely. I sit on the California Senior, it's for senior policy for seniors. And as assembly member on that policy, the seniors are really, we probably have the fastest growing senior population in the country. And so we really understand what it means. I heard Ms. Ruther, and I know how to pronounce it because I'm from Detroit, Michigan. When I heard her talk about the one level trauma center, we don't even have one in LA County in our district supervisor district. So this could be significant, and I'm always on the supervisors about this. So when you think about all the things that this could bring, I don't know how anybody could be saying no. So thank you.
I totally agree. So folks, if we have some questions for all the speakers, this is our Q&A period to address a question for any of the speakers to answer. Liz Barris, so Liz, you'll have to unmute yourself. Your hand is raised if you have a question. Or
Okay, hi. Can you hear me?
yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it's an honor to be here. You guys are incredible. And I actually do have a question. I'm going to just read what I wrote down. All right, well, let me just speak without reading this. There's a situation with UCC codes having been changed and then legislation having been passed state by state. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the David Webb book and the movie, The Great Taking. Are you familiar with this or? No? Okay. Well, anyway, so the UCC codes, when banks file for insolvency, they now have the right to seize cash and assets, meaning bonds, stocks, things like that. And so my question was, would this bank be immune? Corporations have an obligation to their shareholders to maximize profits. So I would think that they would be obligated to do that, to seize cash and assets when everybody starts filing for insolvency, all these banks. So my question is, would this bank somehow be, exempt from that in some way or no? That's my question.
I would say the DNA of the bank is different, but I'm going to let Alphecca quickly answer that.
Okay.
Alphecca, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this. I am familiar with a piece underneath the 2010 law that tried to prevent banks, to try to ever prevent another financial crisis like we had in 2008, that would seize stocks and deposits and in a bankrupt bank, and then turn it into stocks in the bank. So that was called, instead of the federal government ever bailing out, this was called a bail-in. I think that's just wrong, because what we need to do is prevent banks from getting to the area where they're going to default. And a way not to do that is not to have so many derivatives in banks, and not to reinstate Glass-Steagall, to do other regulations like increased capital requirements that the Trump administration right now is trying to undo. So all that having said, we had banks that did collapse in 2023. That was the Silicon Valley Bank, and then the Fed tried to raise capital requirements, and now Trump is trying to roll all that back. And we'll see where banks could be in big trouble. I mean, they look like they're sailing along smoothly, but they could be in big trouble. As for the NIB, there's a set out in the bill a cascading way to prevent the NIB from itself becoming bankrupt by having good, strong fiduciary rules in place. One of them is to be adequately capitalized. So for sure, it's required. We'll have $1 in capital for every $10 in loans that the bank is giving out. Then we'll have loan officers watching the loans to make sure that they're staying on track and on time. And good management, of course, will keep projects producing, and then the ability, growing the economy, and then the ability of borrowers, including state and local governments, to repay. So the secret sauce of this bank is that it is designed to do the best kind of lending, investing in infrastructure, which will really promote the American economy and get us back on track, and really help with the finances of local governments by doubling economic growth. So that's the plan, and it did work with the last bank, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation under FDR, that doubled economic growth, and we're very confident that that happen again. And then there's a cascading. If the bank gets into trouble, it should set aside loan loss provisions and things like that as it loans out. So
But one thing is certain, the bank is going to be lending to taxing authorities that have a guaranteed form of income anyway, which private industry does not.
Mhm.
Walt McCrae, and then we'll go to Nelson. So Walt, you just unmute yourself.
All right. Well, thanks. I was going to say interesting, the Dodd-Frank rule in, I think, 2010 said that banks would be bailed out. The derivatives, the people who are holding derivatives would get bailed out first,
Perfect.
which means that cities, counties, and states that are in the market are getting screwed if the banks collapse again. So the priority in that regime is not in our favor. Thanks for all of this. Very, very interesting. And by the way, I'm a Detroit native too. So Walter Reuther, unions, etc. We have, I think, what we're looking at here, and what we have here is a systemic failure, a complete systemic failure to serve the needs of the people. It's all in the hands of the megalopolis of financial control. And so we need to have our own banks. So we need to have a national infrastructure bank as one of the primary public entities, institutions, but we also need to have local public banks, because that's where the magic sauce is, as they say. It is having a local bank, instead of having to go to the market, is a dramatically different proposition. For example, North Dakota this week it was issuing financing for infrastructure at 2.4% interest, a pretty reasonable sort of a thing. The market is 4.6 and more, and much more. And they can do that because they have a bank. A bank takes capital and expands itself 10 times if it wants, but it's always in the hands of the people who own the bank. And when the people own the bank, then you've got all kinds of flexibility and resources. So if you've got wonderful funds that are set aside, rainy day funds, all kinds of other stuff, you can only lend what's in that fund. But if you have a bank, that what's in the fund can be used as capital to expand the capability of lending credit. So it's a paradigm shift in the way our democracy can finance itself. And that's really where it's at.
Thank you very much. Harvey, I have a question for you, and then maybe you'd like to comment on this. In the time contextually that you're talking about, FDR kind of coming into his own, Southern Democrats were to the right of many of the Republicans, and he had many of those kind of moderate Republicans in his administration. In today's environment, where I tend to view it as people have changed jerseys, and the old Dixiecrats are basically the Republicans in North Carolina, and it's sorted out where it's no longer this overlap where we have Democrats to the right of Republicans. How do you see us now pushing this forward where we don't have, kind of the traditional overlay that we had when FDR was in power, where you actually had, Lafayette from Wisconsin, a great progressive, but Republican, right? Or La Follette, yeah.
Right.
How did we
In
do
fact,
that?
two of the very key figures in the Senate when Roosevelt was president, upon whom he depended, were George Norris and La Follette. And in fact, in 1936, Roosevelt actually turned his back on the Democrats in the state of Wisconsin to support La Follette's progressive party in the state. Norris, of course, was key to the big infrastructure projects like the TVA, et cetera. One thing that I would say is this, because I've been working on this question a lot. I know Alan Minsky, my co-author on a number of pieces, was here days or weeks ago. I watched the videos recently. Alan and I are working on a campaign, and I'll get back to this will answer your question, are doing our damnedest to advance the idea of a 21st century economic bill of rights. And I could send anyone who's interested more on that. It's interesting that it is getting some momentum. So for example, the obvious state, Massachusetts Democratic Party, has endorsed it. California has endorsed it. There's a Democratic Party. Arizona has endorsed it. The Democrats abroad have endorsed it. The really interesting development is West Virginia Democratic Party, in the wake especially of Manchin's exit, has basically been very keen on progressive ideals, and they have endorsed it. And it's right in their platform on their website. What I'm getting at is this. One of the things that FDR did was he always grounded everything he did in historical terms. One. Two, he always, as much as he talked historically, he made it a point of offering a vision. And by the way, Southern Democrats, even the most white supremacist of Southern Democrats back in the 30s, loved the money of the New Deal coming into their states.
Of course.
The only thing they worried about, and they kept themselves very much aware of it, anytime they smelled the possibility they acted against something, is they just didn't want to desegregate anything. And in fact, not unlikely that the Economic Bill of Rights that FDR proposed might have actually had far more, what he proposed in 44, would have had far more of a chance of being enacted in some way if they weren't convinced that an Economic Bill of Rights, because they were rights, would literally have demanded the desegregation of hospitals and schools, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. So what can one do about crossing the line, so to speak, today, I think is what you're getting at?
Yeah, with this sort out where you don't have that situation where it's kind of overlaid like this.
Yeah, well, I think it's crucial to know that we had polls done regarding the 10 items in our Economic Bill of Rights. And the majority of Americans, and that includes Republicans, I can't tell you if it includes MAGA numbers, but it probably does. The fact is that Americans want national health care. They want education, public education, free as far as one's abilities could take one. They want decent housing for all Americans. That's how it was phrased, and they are agreeing. The question is not, I don't think the question is as great a challenge as we imagine it. The biggest challenge is, and let's assume for a start that the Republicans won't go near this idea, okay? I know this is a nonpartisan organization. It's the Democrats or bust, so to speak. But that's the problem.
Yes.
The Democratic Party is not moving on these things. And it's really, really a problem. The Democrats need a vision. The other thing is, another way around this would be when FDR proposed the Economic Bill of Rights in 1944, the AFL-CIO did not exist. There was the AFL, there were the trades unions, and the CIO were the industrial unions, and they were separate. Both the CIO and the AFL and the National Farmers Union and I believe the NAACP, there was a National Civic Political Action Committee. All of these groups not only endorsed it, they, especially the CIO and the FFL, they went out and campaigned nationally to try to bring it about. I'll also add that FDR died, but the idea didn't die.
No,
The
it didn't.
1960 Democratic Party platform, I could show you, but I won't go through it right now, was written by Chester Bowles, who headed up the Price Administration office during the war for FDR. He was the author of the 1960 Democratic Party platform that he literally held forums on around the country. It was laid out, the domestic section, completely in terms of the Economic Bill of Rights. A. Philip Randolph, the great Black and labor civil rights and labor leader, he proposed a freedom budget in '66, which had it ever been enacted, had huge endorsements, 150 religious leaders, university leaders, labor leaders, you name it. FDR was interested as a next step of the Great Society, but the war in Vietnam got in the way. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, not long before his assassination, authored an article in Look magazine calling for an economic bill of rights. I mean, the idea persisted, and the trick is this vision needs to be embraced by the labor movement, just as it was embraced in 1944, and by the Democratic Party, which has had a history of coming back to it. And of course, the civil rights and African-American organizations. I mean, we need a vision, which would include, of course, the imperative of infrastructure development. I mean, I've been arguing for infrastructure development for years, as soon as that original report came out from the civil engineers. I mean, that was an embarrassment. And then, of course, the tragedies that we've witnessed in this country. So
It is an embarrassment. Totally. So, Brian or Christine, do you want to offer anything? I can call on whoever wants to go first. Can unmute. Okay, so we'll go with Christine. We'll let you go, and then Brian.
Sure.
Or Brian first, and Christine. Go on. Do you want to offer anything?
Well, no, I think this is a really productive, extremely productive discussion. But I think what I want to offer is as an active member of the National Association of Counties, and I'm the executive board member of the NDCO, which is the National Democratic County Officials. And of course, we have full-time lobbyists in DC, is maybe to try to work up a game plan on how to work this through Congress. And so I just want to make that offer. And I can get resolutions passed by my county council and by my state legislature. I don't think that would be a problem. But working in DC and getting the votes on the ground, I'd really like to participate. So I would look forward to working with everybody.
We'd love to have you help with that effort. Christine, anything you'd like to offer?
Yeah, I think I unfortunately think that with this is very much needed, and it's going to get pushed through if the various state and local governments and other entities, transit authorities, state DOTs, things like that, can make their voices heard about the need for this kind of work. This honest to God, the sewer authorities, and the wastewater authorities are people we need to go to. Those are things, they're critical infrastructure that is so deep in the background, yet so essential, and needs huge amounts of investment. And believe me, if it goes out, it can make parts of a congressional district uninhabitable. And I think it's really important that we enlist folks like that, because I think one of the challenges that we're going to have in Washington, D.C. right now is unless we sneak this through as, I shouldn't say sneak it through, if this goes through as the Democratic agenda, it's going to be, we're going to have to wait until 2028 to get it passed, because Trump's not going to let it go through. And I worry that Trump won't let it go through, partly because by taking it off the federal balance sheet and putting it in the hands of an entity that's and a board that has fiduciary obligations to serve the people and the borrowers and the shareholders of the bank, and not the agenda of the administration in the White House, we're going to see that there's not going to be a lot of interest in that, because he's going to lose both a carrot and a stick that he has with a lot of states. But I think the key is going to Congress and convincing them that this can help them avoid the kinds of problems that are going to make it difficult for them to get reelected.
Agreed.
And that's, to me, that's the pitch. And I think all the good stories in the world about why this is necessary probably won't get them to vote for it, but why it will keep them in office might. So I hate to be, I'm looking at Brian and I'm thinking he's got that earnest look about him, like he wants to go make this happen. And I think there's a special place in my heart for technocrats, because I've been one of them I was a tax lawyer. That's like what defines me. But I think in this particular case, we've got to go and convince every congressperson we can that it's making something like this happen that's going to keep them in office, whether they have an R next to their name or a D.
What we need are some influencers getting in front of wastewater treatment plants and saying how important they are, instead of in front of the.
I could tell you, like, I'm the council member who gets stuck dealing with solid waste and wastewater
Yes.
and, like elections. I get everything that's a mess. It comes to me in Delaware County. And I have been to places where people have sewer backups. I have seen situations where entire neighborhoods that have not had major investment have basically had their municipal lateral lines collapsing and backups into their houses. And I'm telling you, it can render certain places uninhabitable. It can increase, you could sell this as a positive real estate measure. There's a lot of, I think we need to find the hooks that are going to get to people, because it's anybody with a brain is going to see the reasons why we should do this. It's appealing to the people who don't necessarily want to think about things that are good for other people, and showing them why it's good for them, and why it's good for, why it's going to make them look good. And I expect I'm going to have some more data actually about how certain kinds of investment in sewer lines that actually involve investing in private laterals can have a huge impact on long-term control plans and other things that cost enormous amounts of money. And, and it can be a great thing. It can be a giveaway to the public and a huge environmental plus, and an increase in asset values and property values, and also a decrease in reported problems where people have to go running to their state or federal governments for money.
For non-point source discharges and point source that gets into their waterways. So I think, Carolyn, did you want to say something again? Is Carolyn still on the call? No. If not, then we will go in order of Nelson, Craig, Andrea. Nelson, you had a question or a comment? You are muted, Nelson.
I have a question for Harvey Kaye. Harvey, first of all, I read the Four Freedoms book. I really love your writings.
Thank
And
you.
can you talk about what made FDR, what made him a radical? And is that a term to run away from or to embrace in our current moment moving forward?
Well, what made him a radical is that not only did he see the dire straits that the country was in and the imperative of radical action. Keep in mind, I can't emphasize enough the degree to which his knowledge of history, his understanding of American history, propelled him to move to what generally would be called to the left. Okay. He really did often refer to Washington and the Revolution, at times to Thomas Paine even. In fact, he was the first president since Jefferson to actually refer to Paine in public speeches, because Paine had been scorned because he was such a radical. Although Lincoln, for example, had read Paine avidly when he was a young man in New Salem in Illinois. And quite often, the editor of his collected writings actually said that if you read Paine, you will hear the echoes in Lincoln over and over again. So I think it was the strength of history. I'll tell you the truth that the critique of the teaching of history these days is dishonest, but the teaching of history as it is taught is not good. Okay. In other words, what I'm getting at is we divided up the narrative of American history into themes. And I think young people definitely need a narrative. And so generations were taught the narrative. Now, you can debate about the narrative and the content. And I think it's imperative to understand that history is a matter of tragedy and irony. There's been exploitation and oppression. But it's also the case that the American story has involved repeated struggles. Every generation saw diverse movements of native and native born and newly arrived Americans. That's how powerful the idea of the Declaration's promise was, and FDR appreciated that. Now, the other thing is, and this is important, the first time he actually uses the word radical in a way that he connects himself to it is in 1930. Now, here's what happened. In 1930, in the midst of the early years of the Great Depression, and he's the governor of New York, and he's already having to address it himself. He writes a letter to John Kingsbury, a friend of his, who was probably the foremost figure on questions of social welfare in the country at that time. And he says, oh, I should add, in his mind is a certain fear. There's been the rise of fascism in Europe. And the Soviet Union is a decidedly authoritarian order. So he looks at Europe and he sees the prevalence and the rise of authoritarianisms. With that in mind, he says to his friend Kingsbury, there is no question in my mind that it is time for the country to become fairly radical for a generation. History shows that where that occurs occasionally, nations are saved from revolution. And when he says revolution, he has in mind fascism in Europe. He's not talking about the American Revolution or the French Revolution or anything like that, however vicious the French Revolution ends up becoming. And that's pretty clear. In fact, I read something just a few days ago where somebody said his use of the term revolution and rebellion on occasion may well have been inspired by his own reading of Jefferson. You may recall that Jefferson actually said in every generation, the country is going to require some rebellion, something like that. Now, if you put all of that together, it's almost immediately in those first 100 days, president and people begin a process, if you like, a political and legislative and populist struggle, which has to be ultimately viewed as a Roosevelt revolution. I'll just give a summary. This is what I used to always tell my students. They subjected business and banking to public account and regulation. They empowered government to address the needs of working people and the poor. They organized labor unions, consumer campaigns, and civil rights groups to fight for their rights and broaden and level the we and we the people. They established a social security system. They built schools, libraries, post offices, and parks all across the country. They vastly expanded the nation's public infrastructure with new roads, bridges, tunnels, and dams. They dramatically improved the American landscape and environment, and they energetically cultivated the arts and refashioned popular culture. And as I often say, just think swing music. Okay, moreover, while much remained to be done, they had imbued themselves with fresh democratic convictions, hopes, and aspirations. I mean, questions of African Americans in the South and the discrimination even in the North remained obviously a primary question that had yet to be resolved and addressed properly. But when a second crisis threatened to destroy the country and all it promised, they did not stop. Even as they went all out, both at home and overseas, to defeat their fascist enemies in World War II, they subjected the economy to even greater public control. They continued to expand the labor, consumer, and civil rights movements. The NAACP had 50,000 members in 1940. By 1944, it had 450,000 members, to give you an example of the mobilizations. Furthermore, they did transform the we and we the people. They actually reduced poverty during World War II, and they decidedly decreased inequality from the bottom up because the war production board set wage bottoms. So many an African-American woman was receiving a wage she could only have dreamed of beforehand. So it brought the bottom up. Now, I also want to add, between 1937 and 1973, inequality, material inequality in America decreased every single year over those years. Now, wealth increased and the rich continue to get richer. The image is like this. It's like, so everyone is experiencing improvement. So yeah, even as the rich get richer, nevertheless, inequality is decreasing. The other thing to consider is those who went through the experience of the New Deal. If we say they were 15 years old in 1935, then they were 25 years when they came out of the factories, if they were women, or they came out of the service, in most cases, if they were men. That meant they brought with them the experience of the New Deal and the war effort. Now, in 1950s, they're 35. They rebuilt America. They already knew that they could do it. They rebuilt America in those years. And think about it, even as they rebuilt America, they built the labor union movement continued to expand right through into the mid-1950s. Civil rights movement literally, excuse the way I put it, took off and made a historic difference. And in 1960, look, my generation, our generation perhaps, we chauvinistically claim it's our decade, the 60s. But who voted for the most liberal president since FDR, LBJ, at least in domestic terms, who enacted Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, immigration reform, environmental controls, workplace safety? I mean, that's the generation that was 15 years old in 1935. They're only now in 65, what? So they were 15, this is what, 30 years later. They're only 45 years old.
They're right in the middle of their working career. So Harvey, you have to stop, put a point in right there, pen.
That's exactly where I stop anyhow.
Andrea and Craig, you've been very, we're going to just hold in there, Craig. Andrea, if you have a quick question or comment.
I do. I wanted to return to a subject that Liz Barris brought up that I think a number of people may have not caught on to yet, but the problem about the declining dollar and the banks, going all crypto, well, not all crypto, but doing a lot of that. That comes from state legislatures that have passed into their uniform commercial code, which is nationwide, but it's state by state, have passed what a lot of people don't recognize, haven't seen, that in the case of of banks, any stock companies, everything, investment companies, they start losing ground and can't do everything that they were committed to do, that this bill has been passed all around the country, that the bills, the debt that they run into is going to be sourced from their clients. And it is a very scary thing. There's a lot going on about that around the country, but of course it doesn't get covered in the media. It doesn't get covered, by the administration. But if the National Infrastructure Bank could find a way, maybe writing something up in their policies, that they will not ascribe to that option, they might be able to be a very individual seeming bank that does something differently from what a lot of these others are doing, using the power of the big powers that we don't necessarily get information from. So it comes up by a lot of digging and looking around and sorting things out. And it's been suggested to me that if it was put into the National Infrastructure Bank's policy, that they would not go along with that. I think when this really hits people, they're going to be running to the National Infrastructure Bank.
Yeah, I don't think it's in our DNA to want to do anything like that, but that sounds like one of those bills that Alec was pushing around state legislatures, what you're describing. If people know the American Legislators Council, which basically is a center-right organization that puts bills in every state house, that sounds like an Alec product.
Well, it really isn't. And
It's not, they didn't come through them?
there are states that have already started working on it and having hearings and that sort of thing.
So they haven't passed it everywhere. They're looking at it now.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, Craig, go
Do
ahead.
you hear me?
Yeah,
Andrew, you actually beat me to the punch because I looked at that, what Liz brought up. Those UCC changes were started in 22. And as you correctly suggested, it is connection with the crypto industry, trying to rationalize crypto assets as tangible assets that can act as, borrow against. And I think I would be surprised if ALEC at the American Legislative Council was not involved because, as you said, states individually have to adopt those UCC rules. They're
right.
changed. I used to do UCC filings many moons ago, and they vary from state the statutes. So, but they came up in 22 with the model statute to try to rationalize digital assets as some kind of tangible assets. Our bank wouldn't have nothing to do with that.
No.
Well,
None whatsoever.
they could be drawn in if in the state that any state that is representing the National Infrastructure Bank is caught up in that same statute
Yeah.
that has been changed across the country to this thing that it's even hard to understand. I was in the legislature for some time, and so I understand a lot of the wording. It's not clear to somebody casually reading something.
Sure.
But well, anyway, I'll just leave it there
So,
because it's a big deal in various places, and it's scary.
sure. I just have a couple of quick observations. I'm the rural caucus chair for the Ohio Democratic Party. Real quickly, Randy, you beat me to the punch on calling out Brian on his office. I was thinking Chinatown right away. I thought that was the set, from the land office, and that Brian was the stand-in. The other thing too is, Harvey, you reminded me when you were talking about the labor movements back in the 40s. They were so vocal because they were coming back from Europe. They probably experienced, like you said, a lot of that camaraderie, working together and everything else. Peter Drucker came to mind. He was the management consultant for GM at the time, and he was also advocating for the big businesses, the big companies, the steel companies and auto companies at the time, to adopt what the labor movement, I think, was pushing for, was that pool. So that you would have all the various industries. You'd have the concrete, the auto, steel, glass, you name it, all pulling their various members' resources together. So if any one industry went down, the other ones would be pull them together. And this was sort of like based on the European model. And Drucker, I think, was advocating that at the time. I gave a speech just the other day talking about pushing this as just as a democratic message. I gave a speech in front of the Crawford County Dems the other day. And I really do believe that this is more and more what we have to be advocating as Democrats. I know we are not a partisan group, but and we've spoken to a lot of Republicans. When I speak about public banking, it does, in front of mostly Democratic groups, it still resonates with some of the Republicans and independents that we're speaking to. And right now, as independents are, when you look at the polls, are coming back to the fold. And I think that we could attract a lot more people back to a sensible economic common sense package. And you're bringing back that institutional knowledge and memory of everything that Harvey you brought up, which was, I think, was fantastic. We're losing that amongst the populace. And when we talk about public banking in general, and the message and the resonation I got from that crowd the other day is they welcome this. They know that austerity is not going to work going forward. We're cutting our own throats. Other countries are passing us leaps and bounds, and we're just going further and further behind it. I believe that with all of the cuts that are coming down from the Republican side, the Democratic message must be one of rebirth. And bring it, and that's all we heard about when we spoke in front of the Poverty Council, what Susie talked about, and then Rural Council and the DNC winter meetings. Everybody was talking about bringing back FDR kind of policies. So it's time. Anyhow, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
They're starting to hear the religion. So we're coming to the big finish, folks. Liz, you got to make this real quick, and we need to put up the slide for Harvey Kaye's book, which can be purchased on Amazon. So Liz, unmute yourself. Make a quick comment. You are still muted. You have to unmute.
Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. I did it muted back for some reason. Anyway, I just wanted to really support the idea of this bank being this is like a selling point for this bank. If you guys could somehow separate, yourselves from the pack that's about to just steal basically from everybody. Once they file insolvency, the dominoes start falling. Well, that's it. People's cash assets, they're now up for grabs, and these banks have an obligation to do that per the shareholder profit part of their agreement. By law, they have to maximize shareholder profits. But if this bank could somehow separate themselves, no, you're shaking your head, no.
Oh, no, we agree with you. No. I was shaking my head about how bad that is that these banks are doing this. No, we agree with you 100%.
Yeah, well, I
NIV
think it
have
would be
nothing to do with
incredible.
that.
Okay, yeah. It would be a huge selling point, and I think that it would even be advertised by people that are working with, like David Webb and the attorneys that he's working with but it's been a nonpartisan issue, by the way. Both Democrat and Republican states, all 50, have passed these changes into their legislation and UCC codes so that the banks can grab the assets in addition to the cash. So if this bank could somehow write it into, it's not called bylaws, but into your operating agreement or your rules or whatever, that your charter, thank you. I think it would be a huge, enormous selling point, because this is something to advertise, if it's somehow, if you guys are able to write that into your charter,
So Liz,
so
to the
anyway, that's all.
extent, yeah, to the extent that crypto has behind it a derivative that then melds into this balance sheet of a bank, that's how crypto is injected into the bank. This would be prohibited already under the charter because we do not accept buying any derivatives as an asset of the NIB.
No.
Well, that is just fantastic, but you might have to maximize shareholder profit. No?
No, we're not shareholder driven.
No.
The nonprofit bank, any excess profits of the bank will go into a trust fund to give out grants rather than loans to low-income communities. So it's a public bank. And in addition to that, it's FDIC insured. On the deposit side, though, we will need to attract deposits to make the money circulate around in the fractional reserve banking system that we create the money to give out in loans. So this might be a good safe haven for the NIB. Your deposits are safe because they're not going to be,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, huge, enormous selling point. I would
Yes,
say
yes,
maybe
yes, yes. A good way to, yes, I agree.
PR point.
All
Yeah,
right, so
okay.
we're on to the big
Incredible.
finish. Do we have slides, Angela, we can put up where Harvey's book can be purchased on Amazon, or the NACO resolution that passed unanimously? Or we have a letter to the editor, folks, that NIB Representative Don Cephas got in Austin Statesman that solving the water crisis with the National Infrastructure Bank. So you should work with Stuart, Angela, and the team. If you want to get a letter to the editor put in your paper, coordinate and get these put out there, because that helps. We have an upcoming DNC meeting, I believe, in Minneapolis. Is that correct, Stuart? I believe that's where it's going to be. And we're going to try to have a presence there because, as was said earlier by Carolyn, they're going to introduce a resolution. I will talk to my friends here in North Carolina, their DNC members, to get this passed. We did get this passed, Harvey. If you're of interest in the platform and resolution for the North Carolina State Party, it's in there. We discussed this, so people are actually open to an infrastructure bank. Yeah. And of course, if folks, they still need contributions to help us push this forward. I've managed to get a nonprofit that I founded and worked on to help support, called Sustainable Prosperity, that tries to support these type of efforts. But anyone that can provide anything you can, the efforts are to get us, this is all grassroots driven, to these type of meetings where we can in fact make a difference by being there. And all of you were here tonight, so you're making a difference. And in your communities, you can help make a difference by helping us with your congressional members. So thank you very much for being on the meeting. Harvey, while you're talking, I was texting a number of my friends that are historians from UNC and that teach at UNCG and A&T, and a couple of them actually, knew your book quite well. And
Good to hear.
yeah, one of them was an FDR expert as well, and he had read the book and was texting me. So in any case, folks, thanks for coming on the call. We'll see you next month, and make sure to continue to coordinate back and see how we can push this forward. Thanks for getting on the call tonight.
Thank you.
What's Harvey's
Thank you.
name of the book? Was Harvey's
Yeah, we're
name?
looking for so I thought we were going to put this
Well,
up.
what's the name? What's the
There
name?
it is.
What's
The
the name?
Four
Oh, the Four
Freedoms.
Freedoms. Of course, yes,
The
I read
Fight
that.
for the Four Freedoms.
What
Very
made
good book.
FDR and the Greatest Generation truly great.
Truly great book.
We need an FDR today to run our National Infrastructure Bank.
Truly great book. I read it. It's grand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very